The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Training compound as Sarah Martinez adjusted her medical kit one final time. At 26, she had already earned her place among the most skilled combat medics in the Navy, but today felt different. Today, she would be working alongside Navy SEALs for the first time. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Texas where her father worked as a paramedic and her mother as a nurse. From childhood, she watched them save lives and knew she wanted to follow the same path. But Sarah wanted more than just helping people in peaceful settings. She craved the challenge of saving lives in the most dangerous situations possible. After completing her medical training, Sarah volunteered for every high-risk assignment available. She served in field hospitals, on rescue missions, and in disaster zones. Each experience taught her something new about working under extreme pressure. Her supervisors noticed her calm demeanor and exceptional skills, which led to her current assignment with Special Operations. The SEAL team she would be supporting was preparing for a critical mission overseas. Team leader Commander Jake Harrison had specifically requested a medic with combat experience. Sarah's record showed she had served in 3 combat zones and had saved dozens of lives under fire. What her record didn't show was the personal cost of those saves. As Sarah walked across the compound, she noticed several SEALs watching her with curiosity. She was used to being one of the few women in military medical roles, but working with SEALs was different. These men were legendary for their toughness and their tight brotherhood. She wondered if they would accept her as part of their team. Commander Harrison approached her near the medical station. He was tall and imposing, with kind eyes that seemed to see everything. "Petty Officer Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "I've read your file. Impressive work in Afghanistan." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be working with your team." "The honor is ours," Harrison replied. "We've heard good things about your work. My men need to know they have the best medical support possible, and from what I've seen, that's you." Over the next few weeks, Sarah integrated with the team. She learned their individual medical histories, their fears, and their strengths. She discovered that despite their tough exteriors, each SEAL carried his own battles and scars. Some were physical wounds from previous missions. Others were emotional wounds that ran much deeper. During training exercises, Sarah proved her worth time and again. When Petty Officer Davis twisted his ankle during a night drill, she had him stabilized and ready to continue within minutes. When Sergeant Thompson suffered a severe cut during weapons training, her quick thinking prevented what could have been a serious injury. The SEALs began to respect Sarah not just for her medical skills, but for her dedication to the team. She never complained about the long hours or difficult conditions. She carried her share of equipment and more. She studied constantly, learning new techniques and staying current with the latest battlefield medicine advances. But Sarah carried secrets that none of her teammates knew. During her previous deployment in Afghanistan, she had experienced events that haunted her daily. She had saved lives, but she had also lost patience despite her best efforts. The faces of those she couldn't save appeared in her dreams every night. One evening, while organizing medical supplies, Sarah's hands began to shake as she handled a particular type of bandage. It was the same type she had used trying to save a young soldier who had stepped on an improvised explosive device. She had worked on him for 40 minutes using every technique she knew, but his injuries were too severe. He died in her arms, asking her to tell his mother he loved her. Sarah quickly put the bandages away and took several deep breaths. She had developed techniques for managing these moments, but they were becoming more frequent. The stress of preparing for another dangerous mission was bringing back memories she tried hard to suppress. The next morning brought news that their deployment date had been moved up. The team would be leaving for their mission in just 2 weeks instead of the planned month. This meant accelerated training and less time to prepare mentally for what lay ahead. During a particularly intense training exercise, Sarah found herself treating a simulated casualty when the scenario triggered a flashback. For a moment, she wasn't in the training facility anymore. She was back in that dusty field hospital in Afghanistan, trying desperately to save a life that was slipping away. Sergeant Rodriguez, who was playing the injured soldier in the exercise, noticed that Sarah had frozen. "Doc, you okay?" he asked quietly. Sarah snapped back to the present and continued the treatment without missing a beat. "Just thinking through the procedure," she said. But Rodriguez had seen something in her eyes that concerned him. After the exercise, Rodriguez approached Commander Harrison privately. "Sir, I think our medic might be carrying some heavy stuff from her previous deployments." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. He had suspected as much. Sarah's file showed she had been through intense combat situations, and he knew that kind of experience left marks on everyone. "Keep an eye on her during training. Let me know if you notice anything else." That evening, Sarah sat alone in her quarters writing a letter to her parents. She told them about the upcoming mission and how proud she was to be working with such an elite team. But she didn't tell them about the nightmares or the moments when past and present blurred together. As she sealed the letter, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. Whatever personal battles she was fighting, she would not let them affect her ability to take care of her team. These SEALs were depending on her, and she would not let them down. She had worked too hard and come too far to let her past define her future. The mission was still ahead, and Sarah knew it would test every skill she had learned and every ounce of strength she possessed. She also knew that when the time came, she would be ready to do whatever it took to bring her team home safely. Outside her window, the last light of day faded into darkness, and tomorrow would bring them one day closer to deployment. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself aboard a military transport aircraft flying toward a classified destination in the Middle East. The cabin was dimly lit, and the steady drone of the engines created a hypnotic background noise. Around her, the 8-man SEAL team checked their equipment one final time before catching whatever sleep they could manage. Commander Harrison sat across from Sarah, reviewing mission details on a tablet. The target was a compound where high-value enemy operatives were believed to be planning attacks on civilian populations. Intelligence suggested the compound was heavily fortified and well defended. It would be a challenging insertion with multiple potential complications. "Martinez," Harrison called softly, getting Sarah's attention without waking the others. "I want to go over the medical protocols one more time." Sarah nodded and pulled out her mission notes. They had rehearsed every possible medical scenario during training, but Harrison was the type of leader who believed in being overprepared. "Primary extraction point is the courtyard. If that's compromised, we have the roof as backup. Closest friendly medical facility is 47 minutes by helicopter, if weather conditions are favorable." "And if conditions aren't favorable?" Harrison asked. "Then I keep everyone stable until they are," Sarah replied with quiet confidence. Harrison smiled slightly. He had grown to appreciate Sarah's straightforward approach to challenges. "What about your medical supplies?" Sarah patted the oversized medical kit secured to her gear. "Enough for major trauma, extended field surgery if necessary, and pain management for the entire team. Plus emergency medications for allergic reactions and cardiac events." "Good, remember this isn't training. Once we're on the ground, everything becomes real very quickly." Sarah understood the weight of his words. She had been in real combat before, but never with a team this small in such a dangerous situation. In her previous deployments, she had usually worked in established medical facilities with backup support. This mission would require her to be completely self-sufficient. As the aircraft continued its journey through the night, Sarah's mind wandered to her conversation with her mentor, Dr. Rebecca Chen, just before deployment. Dr. Chen had been the one who first encouraged Sarah to pursue combat medicine, and she had been tracking Sarah's career with interest. "I know you've been through some difficult experiences," Dr. Chen had said during their final meeting. "Combat medicine takes a toll on everyone. Don't try to carry everything alone." Sarah had assured Dr. Chen that she was managing well, but privately, she knew the older doctor had seen through her facade. The nightmares were becoming more frequent, and sometimes she found herself checking and rechecking medical procedures she had performed flawlessly hundreds of times. The aircraft began its descent, and Sarah felt her stomach tighten with a familiar mixture of anticipation and anxiety. She ran through her mental checklist one final time, visualizing each step of potential medical procedures. This ritual helped her focus and pushed away the intrusive thoughts that sometimes threatened her concentration. Petty Officer Davis, who was seated next to her, noticed her preparation routine. "You always this thorough, Doc?" "Always," Sarah replied. "Your lives are too important for anything less." Davis nodded approvingly. Over the past few weeks, he had come to trust Sarah completely. During a training accident where he had suffered a deep cut from a piece of equipment, she had treated the wound so efficiently that he barely felt any pain. Her hands had been steady, her voice calm, and her attention focused entirely on taking care of him. The aircraft touched down at a forward operating base just after midnight local time. The team would rest for a few hours, receive final intelligence updates, and then proceed to their insertion point. As they disembarked, Sarah noticed the familiar sights and sounds of a military base in an active combat zone. Guard towers with searchlights swept the perimeter continuously. The distant sound of helicopters could be heard coming and going throughout the night. Medical evacuation helicopters were on standby, their crews sleeping near their aircraft so they could respond within minutes if needed. Sarah was assigned a small room in the medical building where she could rest and organize her equipment. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she found herself thinking about the upcoming mission and all the things that could go wrong. She remembered a conversation with Sergeant Thompson during training. He had asked her what scared her most about combat medicine. Sarah had given him the standard answer about being prepared for anything, but the truth was more complicated. Her greatest fear wasn't that she would encounter something she couldn't treat. Her greatest fear was that her past experiences would interfere with her ability to think clearly when someone's life depended on her. Around 3 a.m, Sarah gave up trying to sleep and decided to review her medical protocols once more. She pulled out her field manual and began studying techniques for treating gunshot wounds in low-light conditions. As she read, she felt her confidence returning. This was what she had trained for, and she was as ready as anyone could be. At dawn, Commander Harrison gathered the team for final briefing. Intelligence had confirmed that the target compound was still occupied, but enemy strength estimates had increased. What had originally been planned as a relatively straightforward operation was now looking more complicated. "We're still going," Harrison announced, "but I want everyone to understand that this mission has a higher risk level than originally anticipated." He looked around at each team member, making eye contact to ensure they understood the seriousness of the situation. When his eyes met Sarah's, she nodded firmly to show she was ready. "Martinez, I need you to be extra alert. If things go badly, you might be treating multiple casualties simultaneously." "Understood, sir. I'm prepared for that scenario." The team spent the next few hours doing final equipment checks and reviewing contingency plans. Sarah tested her communications equipment, organized her medical supplies for quick access, and mentally rehearsed the building layouts they had studied. As they prepared to board the helicopters that would take them to their insertion point, Sergeant Rodriguez approached Sarah privately. "Doc, I wanted you to know that the whole team has complete confidence in you. We know you'll take care of us." Sarah felt a surge of emotion at his words. These men had accepted her not just as their medic, but as part of their brotherhood. That trust meant everything to her, and she was determined not to let them down. The helicopters lifted off as the sun was setting, flying low to avoid detection. Sarah looked out the small window at the landscape passing below. Somewhere in that terrain was their target, and within hours, everything she had trained for would be put to the ultimate test. As they flew toward their destiny, Sarah made one final check of her medical kit and whispered a quiet prayer for the safety of her team. The helicopters touched down in complete darkness 3 kilometers from the target compound. Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as her feet hit the ground, and the aircraft immediately lifted off, leaving the team alone in enemy territory. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of the helicopters disappearing into the night. Commander Harrison used hand signals to guide the team into formation. Sarah found herself in the middle of the group, which was standard protocol for protecting the medic. Her medical kit felt heavier than usual, but she knew the weight was mostly in her mind. Every piece of equipment had been carefully selected and tested. The terrain was rocky and uneven, requiring careful movement to avoid making noise. Sarah had trained extensively for this type of movement, but the reality was more challenging than any simulation. Every step had to be deliberate, and the team's progress was necessarily slow. After an hour of careful movement, they reached their observation point overlooking the target compound. Harrison and his team leaders used night vision equipment to study the layout and identify guard positions. Sarah used this time to review the building schematics one final time and planned potential casualty collection points. The compound was larger than the intelligence photos had suggested. 3 main buildings surrounded a central courtyard, with guard towers at 2 corners. Heat signatures indicated at least 15 people inside the buildings, more than originally estimated. This meant the mission would be more complex and potentially more dangerous. Change of plans, Harrison whispered during the team briefing. We'll enter through the north wall instead of the main gate. Martinez, you'll set up your aid station behind the generator building. That gives you cover and quick access to both extraction points. Sarah nodded, mentally adjusting her plans. The generator building would provide good protection, but it would also limit her visibility of the team's movements. She would have to rely more heavily on radio communications to track who needed medical attention. At exactly midnight, the mission began. The team moved like shadows, approaching the compound walls with practiced precision. Sarah watched through her night vision equipment as they placed explosive charges on a section of the north wall. The explosion would signal the beginning of the assault phase. When the charges detonated, Sarah felt the concussion wave even from her position. The team immediately moved through the breach, and within seconds, she could hear the sounds of gunfire from inside the compound. Her radio crackled with position reports and tactical updates. Contact. Building 1 east side, came Sergeant Thompson's voice. 2 targets down. Courtyard clear, reported Petty Officer Davis. Sarah monitored the communications while scanning the area around her position. Her job during the assault phase was to stay ready and wait for casualties. She hoped there wouldn't be any, but experience had taught her that hope and preparation were 2 different things. 10 minutes into the assault, her radio crackled with the call she had been dreading. Medic Building 2 Rodriguez is down. Gunshot wound to the leg. Sarah grabbed her medical kit and moved quickly toward Building 2. The route required crossing 30 meters of open ground, but the team had cleared the immediate area. As she ran, she could hear ongoing gunfire from other parts of the compound. She found Rodriguez behind a concrete barrier, conscious but in obvious pain. Blood was seeping through his uniform pants, and Sarah could see that the bullet had hit his upper thigh. She immediately began her assessment while calling for suppressing fire to keep enemy shooters away from their position. How bad is it, Doc? Rodriguez asked through gritted teeth. Not too bad, Sarah replied as she cut away his pant leg to expose the wound. Bullet went through clean, missed the major arteries. You're going to be fine. As she worked, Sarah's training took over completely. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound, applying hemostatic agents to control bleeding and bandaging the injury securely. The gunfire around them became background noise as she focused entirely on her patient. Within 5 minutes, Rodriguez was stabilized and ready for movement. Sarah helped him to a covered position where he could continue to provide support fire for the team while staying out of immediate danger. Thanks, Doc, Rodriguez said. I can still fight. You can provide covering fire, but no running around, Sarah ordered firmly. That leg needs to stay as still as possible. As she prepared to return to her aid station, another call came over the radio. Medic Building 3, Thompson needs immediate attention. Shrapnel wounds to the chest and arms. Sarah's heart rate increased as she processed this information. Shrapnel wounds could be extremely serious, especially to the chest area. She grabbed additional supplies from her kit and moved quickly toward Building 3. The route to Thompson's position was more dangerous, requiring her to move through an area where enemy fire was still possible. Commander Harrison's voice came over her radio. Martinez, hold position. We're clearing a path for you. Negative, sir. Thompson needs attention now, Sarah replied. I'm moving. Sarah used every bit of cover available as she made her way to Thompson's position. She could hear bullets hitting the ground near her, but her focus was entirely on reaching her patient. The sounds of combat seemed to fade as her mind narrowed to the single purpose of providing medical care. She found Thompson conscious but bleeding from multiple small wounds across his chest and left arm. A grenade explosion had sent metal fragments into his body, but his protective vest had prevented the most serious injuries. Sarah quickly assessed that none of the wounds appeared life-threatening, but they needed immediate attention to prevent infection and excessive blood loss. How you doing, Sarge? Sarah asked as she began cleaning the wounds. Been better, Thompson replied with a weak smile, but still breathing. As Sarah worked on Thompson, she became aware that the gunfire in the compound was decreasing. The team was gaining control of the situation, which meant her patients would soon be safe from immediate danger. This allowed her to focus more thoroughly on providing comprehensive medical care. Doc, we've got the primary building secured, came Commander Harrison's voice over the radio. How are our casualties? Rodriguez is stable, minor wound. Thompson has multiple shrapnel wounds, but nothing life-threatening. Both will be ready for extraction in 15 minutes. Outstanding work, Martinez. Get them ready to move. As Sarah finished treating Thompson, she felt a familiar sense of satisfaction. Despite the dangerous conditions, she had been able to provide immediate, effective medical care to her teammates. Both men would recover fully and return to active duty. But as she helped Thompson to his feet, Sarah noticed that her hands were shaking slightly. The adrenaline of the combat situation was beginning to wear off, and her body was reacting to the stress. She took several deep breaths and reminded herself that the mission wasn't over yet. The team still needed to complete their primary objective, and then get everyone safely back to the extraction point. As their medic, Sarah knew her job was far from finished. The compound had fallen silent except for the low voices of the SEAL team members conducting their search operations. Sarah helped Thompson and Rodriguez to a secure position in the central courtyard, where she could monitor both patients while staying alert for any additional casualties. Commander Harrison approached her position, his face showing relief mixed with concentration. Status report on our wounded? Rodriguez has a through-and-through gunshot wound to the upper thigh. Clean entry and exit, no arterial damage. I've got the bleeding controlled and he's stable for movement, Sarah reported in her crisp professional tone. Thompson took shrapnel from what looks like a defensive grenade. Multiple small puncture wounds to the chest and left arm. His vest protected the vital areas. I've cleaned and dressed all wounds. Both men are ambulatory and ready for extraction. Good work, Harrison said, then paused. We found what we came for, plus some unexpected intelligence materials. Extraction helicopter is inbound, but we've got a problem. Weather conditions have deteriorated and the bird might not be able to land at our primary location. Sarah processed this information quickly. A delay in extraction meant more time in dangerous territory, and weather conditions could complicate medical care if either of her patients experienced complications. What's the backup plan? We might have to move to an alternate extraction point 2 kilometers south. Can your patients handle that kind of movement? Sarah looked at Rodriguez and Thompson, assessing their condition. Rodriguez can make it, but he'll need assistance. Thompson should be fine as long as we don't rush. How rough is the terrain? Mostly flat, but there's a steep descent about halfway there. We'd have to rope down about 15 meters. This complicated things significantly. Moving wounded personnel down a rope required special techniques and additional equipment. Sarah had trained for this scenario, but it was always more challenging in real conditions. I can manage it, she said, but I'll need help with Rodriguez. His leg wound makes rappelling dangerous. Davis and Williams can assist with that. How much time do you need to prep them for movement? Give me 10 minutes to adjust their dressings and administer pain medication. As Harrison moved away to coordinate with the extraction team, Sarah began preparing her patients for what could be a difficult journey. She gave Rodriguez additional pain medication and secured his leg wound with extra padding to protect it during movement. Doc, you ever done a combat extraction like this before? Thompson asked as she worked on his dressing. Once in Afghanistan, Sarah replied, not mentioning that the previous experience had been one of her most traumatic memories. During that extraction, she had lost a patient during the movement despite her best efforts. The memory still haunted her nightmares. Well, we're in good hands then, Thompson said with confidence. Sarah appreciated his trust, but privately, she was reviewing every detail of the upcoming movement. The slightest mistake could turn a stable patient into a critical emergency. She mentally rehearsed the rope techniques for moving casualties and reviewed the additional medical supplies she would need to carry. 20 minutes later, the team began moving toward the alternate extraction point. Sarah had Rodriguez supported between Davis and Williams, while she stayed close to Thompson to monitor his condition. The night air was getting colder, and she could see storm clouds gathering overhead. The first kilometer of movement went smoothly. The terrain was relatively flat, and both patients were managing well. Rodriguez was limping but keeping up with assistance, and Thompson showed no signs of complications from his wounds. But as they approached the steep descent, Sarah could see the challenge ahead. The cliff face was rocky and unstable, with loose stones that could cause someone to lose their footing. In daylight with healthy team members, it would be a routine rappelling exercise. In darkness with wounded personnel, it became a complex medical evacuation. Commander Harrison set up the rope system while Sarah prepared her patients for the descent. She would go down first to establish a safe landing area and be ready to catch anyone who lost control during the rappelling. Davis and Williams would lower Rodriguez using a special harness system that would keep weight off his injured leg. "Thompson, you're going down second," Sarah instructed. "Take your time, don't rush, and let me know if you feel dizzy or weak." "Got it, Doc." Sarah checked her own equipment one final time, then began her descent. The rock face was more unstable than it appeared from above, and several times she had to adjust her route to avoid loose stones. But her training had prepared her for this type of movement, and she reached the bottom safely. Looking up, she could see Thompson beginning his descent. He moved carefully but confidently, and Sarah felt relieved as he reached the bottom without complications. Rodriguez's descent was more complicated, requiring coordination between multiple team members, but Davis and Williams managed the procedure expertly. As the last team member reached the bottom, Sarah checked both patients again. The movement had been successful, with no additional injuries or complications, but she noticed that Rodriguez's pain was increasing, and Thompson was showing signs of fatigue. "How much further to the extraction point?" Sarah asked Harrison. "About 1 kilometer, mostly flat terrain." Sarah administered additional pain medication to Rodriguez and checked Thompson's pulse and blood pressure. Both men were stable, but the physical demands of the movement were taking their toll. She would need to monitor them closely during the final phase of the extraction. The team resumed movement, with Sarah maintaining constant awareness of her patient's condition. The weather was continuing to deteriorate, with wind picking up and the first drops of rain beginning to fall. She pulled out waterproof covers to protect her medical supplies. 30 minutes later, they reached the extraction point just as the helicopter appeared on the horizon. Sarah felt a surge of relief as she prepared her patients for the final phase of the evacuation. Both men had made it through the difficult journey without serious complications. As the helicopter touched down, Sarah helped load Rodriguez and Thompson aboard, providing the flight medic with detailed information about their conditions and treatment. Only when she saw them secured in the aircraft did she allow herself to feel the satisfaction of another successful mission. But as the helicopter lifted off, carrying her patients to definitive medical care, Sarah noticed that her hands were shaking again. The stress of the mission was catching up with her, and memories from her previous deployment were starting to surface. She took deep breaths and reminded herself that this mission had been successful. Both patients were stable and would recover fully. She had done her job well, but privately, she wondered how many more missions like this she could handle before the accumulated stress became overwhelming. Back at the forward operating base, Sarah sat alone in the medical facility, completing her after-action reports. The mission had been deemed a complete success. The intelligence gathered from the compound had already proven valuable, and both Rodriguez and Thompson were recovering well at the main medical facility. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with her. During the rope descent, she had experienced a brief moment where past and present had blurred together. For just an instant, she hadn't been rappelling down a cliff in the current mission. Instead, she was back in Afghanistan, trying to evacuate a critically wounded soldier under enemy fire. The flashback had lasted only seconds, but it had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. This was the third time in recent weeks that her past experiences had intruded on her present duties. She was beginning to worry that these episodes might interfere with her ability to provide medical care when her team needed her most. Dr. Patricia Wells, the base psychologist, knocked on the door of Sarah's quarters the next morning. Sarah had been expecting this visit. After every combat mission, medical personnel were required to participate in psychological debriefing sessions. "How are you feeling about yesterday's mission?" Dr. Wells asked as they settled into comfortable chairs in her office. "Good," Sarah replied automatically. Both casualties were successfully treated and evacuated. No complications during transport. "That's the medical report," Dr. Wells said with a gentle smile. "I'm asking about you personally. How did you feel during the mission?" Sarah hesitated. She had become expert at deflecting these types of questions, but something in Dr. Wells's manner suggested that deflection wouldn't work this time. It was challenging. Moving casualties down that cliff face was more complex than training scenarios. Commander Harrison mentioned that you performed exceptionally well under difficult conditions. He said you insisted on reaching Sergeant Thompson even when enemy fire was still incoming. "That's my job," Sarah said simply. "Yes, but it's also dangerous. Some medics might have waited for the area to be completely secure before moving forward." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. My patients needed immediate care. Waiting could have cost lives. Dr. Wells made notes on her tablet. Tell me about your previous deployment experiences. I see you served in Afghanistan for 18 months. This was the question Sarah had been dreading. Her Afghanistan deployment had been intense, with daily casualties and limited resources. She had saved many lives, but she had also lost patients despite her best efforts. Those losses haunted her constantly. It was busy, Sarah said carefully. High casualty rates, complex wounds, limited supplies. Good training for this type of work. Any particular cases that stick in your memory? Sarah's mind immediately went to Private Michael Chen, the young soldier who had died in her arms despite 40 minutes of intensive treatment. She could still see his face clearly, still hear him asking her to tell his mother he loved her. All cases are memorable, she said. Each patient teaches you something. Dr. Wells studied Sarah's face carefully. I'm seeing some signs that suggest you might be experiencing post-traumatic stress. Difficulty sleeping, hypervigilance, intrusive memories. These are normal reactions to combat exposure. Sarah felt a spike of anxiety. If Dr. Wells determined that she was suffering from PTSD, she could be removed from active duty and lose her place with the SEAL team. I sleep fine, she lied. No problems with memory or concentration. Sarah, seeking help for psychological wounds doesn't make you weak or unfit for duty. In fact, addressing these issues makes you a better medic and a safer team member. But Sarah couldn't risk losing her position. The SEAL team trusted her, and she couldn't let them down by admitting weakness. I appreciate your concern, but I'm managing fine. Yesterday's mission proves that I can handle the stress of combat operations. Dr. Wells made more notes. I'm going to recommend that you continue with regular counseling sessions. This isn't optional, and it doesn't reflect negatively on your fitness for duty. Think of it as maintenance, like servicing your medical equipment. After the session, Sarah returned to her quarters feeling frustrated and worried. She understood that Dr. Wells was trying to help, but Sarah couldn't afford to show any sign of weakness. Too many people were depending on her. That evening, Commander Harrison found her in the medical facility, updating her equipment inventory. Martinez, I wanted to thank you again for yesterday. Rodriguez and Thompson both sent messages saying you probably saved their careers. Thompson's wounds could have been much worse without immediate treatment. Just doing my job, sir. Harrison sat down across from her. I also wanted to talk to you about something else. Dr. Wells mentioned that you might be dealing with some stress from previous deployments. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Sir, I can assure you that my performance hasn't been affected. Yesterday's mission demonstrates that I'm fully capable of providing medical support under combat conditions. I'm not questioning your capabilities, Harrison said gently, but I am concerned about you as a person. This team takes care of each other, and that includes our medic. I'm fine, sir, really. Harrison studied her for a moment. You know, I've been leading special operations teams for 15 years. I've learned to recognize when someone is carrying more weight than they should be. It's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. With respect, sir, I don't need help. I need to focus on being ready for the next mission. Harrison nodded slowly. Fair enough. But I want you to know that if you ever need to talk about anything, my door is always open. That's not just as your commanding officer, but as someone who understands what combat does to people. After Harrison left, Sarah sat alone with her thoughts. She appreciated his concern, but she couldn't risk appearing vulnerable. The team needed to have complete confidence in her abilities, and any sign of weakness could undermine that trust. She pulled out her tablet and began reviewing medical procedures, the same ritual that helped her focus and push away unwanted memories. But tonight the familiar routine wasn't working as well as usual. Images from Afghanistan kept intruding on her concentration. Finally, she gave up trying to study and decided to write another letter to her parents. But as she began to write, she found herself struggling to find words that wouldn't worry them. How could she explain that she was living her dream of being a special operations medic, while also battling nightmares from her past? In the end, she wrote about the successful mission and the pride she felt in serving with such an elite team. She didn't mention the psychological sessions or her growing concern about the flashbacks, some burdens she decided were meant to be carried alone. 3 weeks after the successful compound mission, Sarah found herself facing her greatest challenge yet. Intelligence had identified a high-priority target in a remote mountain village, but the mission parameters were unlike anything the team had attempted before. The target was located in a building complex surrounded by civilian homes. Enemy forces were known to use civilians as human shields, which meant the team would need to be extremely careful during the assault. More concerning for Sarah was the medical situation. The nearest evacuation point was over an hour away by helicopter, and weather conditions in the mountains were unpredictable. "This mission has higher medical risk than anything we've done," Commander Harrison explained during the briefing. "If we take casualties, Martinez will need to provide extended field care until evacuation becomes possible." Sarah nodded, though privately she felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Extended field care meant potentially performing complex medical procedures under combat conditions with limited resources. It was exactly the type of scenario that had led to her worst experiences in Afghanistan. "I'll need additional medical supplies," Sarah said. "Surgical instruments, extra blood products, and extended duration pain medications." "Already arranged," Harrison replied. "You'll have everything on the standard special operations medical list, plus additional items you've requested." Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into preparation with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She practiced surgical procedures repeatedly, studied every possible medical complication, and organized her supplies for quick access in any situation. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had recovered fully from his leg wound, noticed Sarah's increased focus during training. "Doc, you're pushing pretty hard. Maybe you should take a break." "I'm fine," Sarah replied automatically. "Just want to be ready." But Rodriguez had seen this type of behavior before in soldiers who were under extreme stress. He mentioned his concerns to Commander Harrison, who was already keeping a close eye on Sarah's condition. The night before the mission, Sarah found herself unable to sleep again. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw images from her Afghanistan deployment. The faces of patients she had lost seemed to be watching her, questioning whether she would be able to save lives when it mattered most. At 3 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep and went to the medical facility to check her equipment. One final time. Everything was perfectly organized, but she found herself compulsively rechecking supplies and procedures. "Can't sleep either." Sarah turned to find Commander Harrison standing in the doorway. "Just making sure everything's ready, sir." Harrison entered the room and sat down. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Are you ready for this mission?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely ready. I'm not asking about your equipment or your training. I'm asking about you personally. Can you handle the stress of potentially treating multiple casualties in extended field conditions?" Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the question she had been dreading. "Sir, I've treated casualties under fire before. My record speaks for itself." "Your record is outstanding," Harrison agreed. "But I'm seeing signs that suggest you might be pushing yourself too hard. Dr. Wells has expressed some concerns." "My performance hasn't been affected," Sarah insisted. "I've successfully treated every patient I've encountered since joining this team." Harrison studied her carefully. "What happened in Afghanistan, Sarah? And don't give me the official report. I want to know what's driving you to work 18-hour days and check your equipment 5 times per night." For a moment, Sarah considered telling him everything. The weight of carrying her memories alone was becoming overwhelming, and she desperately wanted to share the burden with someone who might understand. But her fear of losing her position was stronger than her need for support. "Nothing happened that I can't handle, sir. I lost some patients like every combat medic does, but I learned from those experiences and they made me better at my job." "Did you receive counseling after your deployment?" "Yes, sir. Standard debriefing sessions. But nothing for the specific cases that affected you most?" Sarah hesitated. The truth was that she had never talked to anyone about Private Chen's death or the other patients she had lost. She had convinced herself that processing those experiences alone was part of being a professional soldier. "Sir, if you have concerns about my fitness for duty, I understand. But I believe my performance demonstrates that I'm capable of providing the medical support this team needs." Harrison was quiet for several minutes. "Sarah, I'm going to tell you something that stays between us. During my 3rd deployment, I lost half my team in an ambush. For months afterward, I second-guessed every decision I made. I pushed myself to be perfect because I thought that would somehow honor the men I'd lost." He paused, watching her reaction. "It wasn't until I nearly got another team member killed, because I was too afraid to make a quick decision, that I realized I needed help. Getting counseling didn't make me weak. It made me a better leader." Sarah felt tears threatening, but she fought them back. "Sir, I appreciate you sharing that, but my situation is different. I haven't lost team members. I've just lost patience despite my best efforts." "And that's eating at you every day, isn't it?" The question hit closer to home than Sarah wanted to admit. "I can handle it." Harrison stood up. "I believe you can, but I don't think you should have to handle it alone. After this mission, I want you to work with Dr. Wells on a regular basis. Not because I question your abilities, but because I care about your well-being. And if I refuse, then I'll have to consider whether you're fit for continued duty with this team. Not because you're not skilled enough, but because you're carrying too much weight to be safe." After Harrison left, Sarah sat alone in the medical facility, feeling more isolated than ever. She understood that he was trying to help, but she couldn't risk appearing weak. Too many people were depending on her strength. As dawn approached, Sarah made a decision. She would complete this mission successfully, proving once and for all that she could handle any medical challenge. Then maybe she would consider seeking additional help for the memories that haunted her. But first, she had to get through the next 24 hours without letting her past interfere with her duty to her team. Lives would depend on her ability to stay focused, and she was determined not to let anyone down. The mountain mission began before dawn with a helicopter insertion that went flawlessly. Sarah felt a familiar calm descend over her as the team moved into position overlooking the target village. Despite her sleepless night, her focus was sharp and her preparation thorough. The village was quiet in the early morning light, with only a few civilians visible moving between buildings. The target compound was exactly as described in the intelligence briefings. A 2-story stone building surrounded by smaller homes where innocent families lived their daily lives. Commander Harrison's voice came through Sarah's earpiece as the team prepared for the assault. "Remember, we have civilians in the area. Precision is everything. Martinez, you'll establish your aid station behind the stone wall on the north side. Good cover and quick access to both extraction points." "Understood, sir," Sarah replied, checking her medical kit one final time. The assault began with textbook precision. The team moved through the village like shadows, avoiding civilian areas and approaching the target building from multiple directions. Sarah monitored radio communications from her aid station, tracking each team member's position and status. For the first 20 minutes, everything proceeded according to plan. The team secured the perimeter of the target building and prepared for entry. Sarah allowed herself to hope that this mission would be completed without casualties. Then everything went wrong at once. "Contact. Multiple shooters on the second floor." Davis's voice crackled over the radio. "RPG incoming," shouted Thompson. The explosion that followed shook the ground beneath Sarah's feet. Through her radio, she could hear the chaos of a fierce firefight erupting inside the building. Her training kicked in automatically as she prepared for multiple casualty scenarios. "Medic! Building entrance, Williams is down." The call she had been dreading came through clearly. Sarah grabbed her kit and moved toward the target building, using cover to avoid the ongoing firefight. She could see Williams lying motionless near the entrance, blood pooling around his head and chest. As she reached Williams, Sarah immediately began her assessment. He had taken shrapnel to the head and chest from the RPG explosion. His breathing was shallow and irregular, indicating serious internal injuries. This was the type of critical case that required immediate surgical intervention. "Williams, can you hear me?" Sarah called as she checked his pulse and breathing. His eyes fluttered open briefly. "Doc, can't breathe." Sarah could see that Williams had a penetrating chest wound that had likely collapsed his lung. She would need to perform an emergency chest decompression to save his life. A procedure she had done before, but never under such intense combat conditions. As she prepared her equipment, another call came over the radio. "Medic, second floor. Rodriguez has taken multiple hits." Sarah's heart sank. She now had 2 critical patients requiring immediate attention, but she could only be in one place at a time. This was the nightmare scenario she had trained for but hoped never to face. "Davis, can you get to Rodriguez and assess his condition?" Sarah called over the radio while continuing to work on Williams. "Negative, Doc. Stairway is blocked by enemy fire." Sarah made a split-second decision that would haunt her for years to come. Williams needed immediate chest decompression to survive, but Rodriguez might bleed out if he didn't receive treatment soon. She had to choose which patient to save first. She inserted a needle into Williams's chest cavity, relieving the pressure that was preventing his lung from expanding. His breathing immediately improved, but he would need constant monitoring and possible additional procedures. "Thompson, I need you to watch Williams," Sarah called. "Keep pressure on his chest wounds and monitor his breathing. If it becomes shallow again, call me immediately." Sarah then moved toward the building to reach Rodriguez, but enemy fire forced her to take cover. She was trapped between two critical patients, unable to provide adequate care to either one. In that moment, memories from Afghanistan crashed over her like a wave. She was suddenly back in that field hospital, watching Private Chen die despite her desperate efforts to save him. The feelings of helplessness and failure threatened to overwhelm her. But then she heard William's voice calling weakly for help, and her focus snapped back to the present. These were her teammates, her responsibility, and she would not let them down. "Harrison, I need covering fire to reach Rodriguez," she called over the radio. "Copy that." Davis and Thompson lay down, suppressing fire. "Martinez, you have 30 seconds. Sarah sprinted through the entrance and up the damaged stairway, her medical kit bouncing against her back. She found Rodriguez conscious but bleeding heavily from wounds to his arm and abdomen. "How bad?" he asked as she began her assessment. "Bad enough," Sarah replied honestly. "But I can fix it." Over the next hour, Sarah performed medical procedures she had never attempted under such extreme conditions. She stabilized Rodriguez's abdominal wound, controlled bleeding from his arm, and managed his pain while coordinating his evacuation. Meanwhile, Thompson continued to monitor Williams under her radio guidance, following her instructions precisely to keep him stable until evacuation arrived. When the helicopters finally landed, Sarah had successfully kept both patients alive through the most challenging medical emergency of her career. As she watched them being loaded onto the aircraft, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and pride. But it wasn't until later, during the debriefing session, that the full impact of the mission became clear. Commander Harrison gathered the team to discuss what had happened and recognize exceptional performance. "I want everyone to understand what we witnessed today," Harrison began. "Martinez faced every combat medic's worst nightmare, multiple critical casualties under fire with no backup support. Not only did she keep both patients alive, but she did so while providing medical guidance to team members and coordinating evacuation procedures." He paused, looking directly at Sarah. "What many of you don't know is that Martinez has been struggling with traumatic memories from her previous deployment. Despite dealing with her own psychological wounds, she never let those issues affect her ability to save lives." Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and surprise. She had thought she had hidden her struggles from the team, Harrison continued. During her deployment in Afghanistan, Martinez lost patients despite heroic efforts to save them. Those losses have haunted her, but today she proved that past trauma doesn't define future capability. She saved 2 lives under impossible conditions while battling her own demons. The room fell silent as the team absorbed this information. Finally, Rodriguez, who had been released from the medical facility that morning, stood up. "Doc, I don't care what happened before today. What matters is that you saved my life and William's life when we needed you most. That's what I'll remember." One by one, each team member stood and voiced similar sentiments. Thompson talked about how her calm voice over the radio had guided him through procedures he had never performed. Davis mentioned her courage in running through enemy fire to reach casualties. Williams, who had been transported back that morning, spoke last. "I remember lying there thinking I was going to die. Then I heard your voice telling me I was going to be okay, and I believed you. That's what a real medic does. They give hope when there isn't any." Sarah felt tears flowing freely as she realized that her teammates didn't see her psychological struggles as weakness. Instead, they saw her service as even more remarkable because she had overcome personal obstacles to save lives. Commander Harrison approached her after the meeting. "Sarah, I think it's time you stopped carrying your burdens alone. Dr. Wells is ready to work with you, and the entire team supports your healing process." For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, Sarah felt ready to confront her past traumas. She had proven to herself and her team that she could function effectively despite her psychological wounds. Now it was time to work on healing those wounds so she could continue serving without carrying unnecessary pain. "Yes, sir," she replied. "I think I'm ready for that now." As the team dispersed, Sarah remained in the briefing room, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what she had accomplished. She had saved 2 lives under the most extreme conditions imaginable, and she had done so while fighting her own battle against traumatic memories. The road to healing would be long and challenging, but Sarah now understood that seeking help was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign of strength, and it would make her an even better medic and teammate in the future.